When the 8-year-old boy was found sleeping on a curb in the sprawling grocery store parking lot, most people just walked by, assuming his parents were nearby. But one man, a biker named Coltrane, saw something they did not. He saw the exhaustion in the child's small frame and the faint, desperate words scrawled on the back of his t-shirt. Acting on an instinct forged in the deserts of Afghanistan, Coltrane stopped his motorcycle, a decision that would unravel a story of neglect and quiet desperation, turning a routine Saturday afternoon into a life-altering rescue that would echo for years to come. The asphalt of the food giant parking lot shimmered under the oppressive August sun. It was a perfectly ordinary Saturday, filled with the mundane symphony of squeaking cartwheels, beeping car locks, and the distant hum of highway traffic. Families moved in hurried streams, their minds on weekend barbecues and grocery lists, their eyes seeing only the path from their car to the sliding glass doors. It was a landscape of hurried purpose, a place where people existed in their own bubbles of errands and obligations. Into this scene rumbled Jack Coltrane Sterling. At 42, he was a mountain of a man, wide-shouldered and solid, a product of 2 decades in the Marine Corps and another 10 years working construction. He was the sergeant-at-arms for the Iron Sentinels Motorcycle Club, a title he wore with the same quiet gravity as his military decorations. His road name, Coltrane, was a relic from his early days in the service. It spoke to his unflappable demeanor under fire, the way he moved with an unstoppable, methodical force when a situation went sideways. Nothing seemed to rattle him. He sat astride a midnight blue Harley-Davidson, the engine a low, contented growl at idle. The bike was his sanctuary, a 2-wheeled therapist that had carried him through the transition from soldier to civilian. Its chrome gleamed, a stark contrast to his own worn leather vest, which was adorned with the patches of his club and his past. A faded Semper Fi tattoo peeked from under the sleeve of his t-shirt. He was just there to pick up a few things for the clubhouse cookout later that evening. Steak, charcoal, a few bags of ice. A simple run. But Coltrane had been trained to see the world differently. He didn't just see a parking lot. He saw sightlines, potential threats, and anomalies. His gaze swept over the rows of cars, not out of paranoia, but out of a deeply ingrained habit of situational awareness. It was a switch that never truly turned off, and that's when he saw it. An anomaly. Near the far end of the lot, away from the main entrance, a small boy was curled up on the concrete curb behind a dusty minivan. He was using a worn-out backpack as a pillow, his small chest rising and falling in the shallow rhythm of sleep. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. He wore jeans, scuffed sneakers, and a bright green t-shirt. From a distance, it looked like any other kid waiting for his mom or dad to finish loading groceries. But something was wrong. The angle was wrong. The stillness was wrong. The location, so far from the store's entrance and a little too close to the service road exit, felt wrong. There was no parent in sight, no open car trunk, no half-loaded cart. There was just the boy, the heat, and the unrelenting sun beating down on his small, sleeping form. Coltrane's internal radar, the one that had kept him and his men alive in places far more dangerous than this, began to ping. It was a low, quiet hum at first, a gentle nudge from his subconscious. He saw people walk past, some glancing at the boy for a second, before continuing on their way, lost in their own worlds. They saw a sleeping kid. Coltrane saw a vulnerability. He saw a target. He eased his bike forward, the engine's growl dropping to a near whisper as he coasted slowly down the aisle. He didn't want to startle the child. He stopped about 20 feet away, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was jarring. He swung a heavy boot over the seat and planted it on the ground. He didn't move. He just watched. The boy's hair was matted with sweat. His face was smudged with dirt, and there were faint, pale tracks on his cheeks where tears had dried. Even in sleep, his brow was furrowed with a tension that no child should ever carry. The front of his t-shirt had a cartoon dinosaur on it, roaring with a cheerful "Rawr!" It was a normal kid's shirt. But as Coltrane's eyes scanned the scene, taking in every detail, he noticed something else. Faint, dark lettering on the back of the shirt. His gut tightened. This was it, the confirmation, the thing that separated a simple, innocent situation from something else entirely. He knew what a scared kid looked like. He had seen it in the eyes of children in war-torn villages, children who had witnessed horrors that no one, let alone a child, should ever see. He saw a flicker of that same desperate survival in this boy's posture, even in sleep. He had learned that the most desperate pleas for help were often the quietest. They weren't screams, they were whispers. They were notes passed in secret. They were signals that only a watchful eye would catch. Coltrane took a slow, deliberate step forward, his boots heavy on the hot pavement. He moved with a practiced stillness, the way a hunter approaches a frightened animal. He circled around, keeping his distance, until he could see the boy's back clearly. The letters were written in what looked like a black permanent marker. The handwriting was shaky, childlike. Some of the letters were backward. It was faint, as if it had been written in a hurry or with a dying pen. But the message was perfectly clear. 5 small words. Help me. Can't wake Mom. The air seemed to rush out of Coltrane's lungs. The background noise of the parking lot faded into a dull, meaningless roar. The shimmering heat, the distant traffic, the squeaking wheels, it all disappeared. All that existed was the boy and those 5 words. His blood went cold. The quiet hum of his instinct flared into a screaming alarm. This wasn't a lost kid. This wasn't a child waiting for his parents. This was a child in the middle of a crisis so profound that his only recourse was to write a desperate plea on his own back and hope a stranger would see it. He thought about how many people must have walked right by. How many people had seen a sleeping boy and simply kept going, assuming everything was fine. The thought sent a jolt of ice through his veins. He saw the dusty minivan parked just a few feet away. The windows were tinted, but not so dark that you couldn't see inside if you were close. He felt a deep, primal dread creep up his spine. Can't wake Mom. His mind raced through the possibilities, each one darker than the last. Medical emergency? Overdose? Something worse? It didn't matter. What mattered was the boy. He was alone. He was terrified. And he had done the only thing he could think of to ask for help. The decision was not a decision at all. It was a reflex. It was the core of who he was. He was a Marine. He was a sentinel. He did not leave people behind. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the numbers 9, 1, and 1. It was the logical thing to do. Call the police. Call an ambulance. Let the professionals handle it. But his training told him more. The scene was not secure. The minivan was a variable. The mother inside was a question mark. What if she woke up? What if she was impaired and panicked? What if she tried to drive away, with the boy so close to the vehicle? He couldn't just make a call and leave. He couldn't risk it. He had to stay. He had to be the shield. He made the call. His voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the cold fury that was building in his chest. He gave the dispatcher his location, the description of the boy, and the minivan. He relayed the message on the shirt, his voice tight with control. I'm a former Marine, he said, his voice low and firm. The scene is not secure. The mother is unresponsive in the vehicle. The child is outside. I will not be leaving the child's side. I will be standing by until your units arrive. He ended the call. Help was coming, but it felt like a lifetime away. He knew he needed another kind of help too. He sent a short, coded text to the president of his motorcycle club, a man known only as Preacher. Food giant, West Lot, Code Leo, need sentries. Code Leo was a term they had created years ago. It meant a child was in danger. It was the one call that would bring the Iron Sentinels running, no questions asked. It was a call to circle the wagons. With the calls made, he turned his full attention back to the boy. He needed to wake him, but gently. He needed to get him away from the minivan, to a place of relative safety. He walked over and knelt down, his large frame casting a long shadow over the sleeping child. He put a hand softly on the boy's shoulder. Hey, buddy, he said, his voice a low rumble. Hey, little man, time to wake up. The boy's eyes fluttered open. They were wide and brown and filled with a deep, soul-crushing weariness. For a second, there was confusion. Then, fear flashed across his face as he saw the huge, bearded man looming over him. He flinched, pulling away. It's okay, Coltrane said, holding his hands up, palms open. It was a universal sign of peace, one he'd used 100 times. I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Jack. I saw your shirt. The boy's eyes darted from Coltrane's face to his leather vest, then back again. The fear remained, but a tiny flicker of something else appeared. Hope. You saw it? The boy whispered, his voice hoarse. I saw it, Coltrane confirmed, his voice gentle, and help is on the way. But first, I need you to come with me. Just over here, away from the car, okay? He pointed to his motorcycle, parked a safe distance away. We can sit by my bike. It's shady over there. The boy hesitated. He glanced back at the minivan, his lip trembling. My mom. I know, Coltrane said softly. The people who are coming are going to help your mom, too. But right now, my job is to make sure you're safe. Can you help me with that? He saw the internal struggle in the boy's eyes. He had been taught not to talk to strangers, but he had also written a plea for help on his back. The stranger was the only one who had answered. Slowly, the boy nodded. He pushed himself up, his small body stiff and sore from sleeping on the concrete. He grabbed his backpack and clutched it to his chest like a shield. Coltrane stood up and led the way, walking slowly so the boy could keep up. He didn't touch him. He just created a path. When they reached the Harley, he sat down on the curb, leaning his back against the warm front tire. He patted the space next to him. The boy sat down, leaving a careful foot of space between them. He stared at the ground, his small shoulders slumped. What's your name? Coltrane asked quietly. Leo, the boy mumbled. It's nice to meet you, Leo. I'm Jack, he repeated. You've been very brave. Leo didn't respond. He just hugged his backpack tighter. Coltrane didn't push. He knew the boy was in shock. He just needed to be a calm, steady presence, a rock in the storm. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Coltrane kept his body positioned between Leo and the minivan, a living wall. He scanned the parking lot, his eyes missing nothing. Then he heard it, the low, thunderous growl of multiple V-twin engines. 4 more motorcycles swept into the parking lot, their riders moving with practiced formation. They were his brothers. Preacher was in the lead, followed by Bear, Smoke, and Stitch. They parked their bikes in a semicircle, creating a barrier around Coltrane, Leo, and the Harley. They didn't ask what was wrong. They saw Coltrane on the ground with a small child. They saw the minivan. They understood. They dismounted, their faces grim, and stood watch. They became a silent, imposing wall of leather and steel. Anyone approaching would have to go through them. The sight of the 4 huge, bearded men seemed to make Leo shrink even smaller. It's okay, Coltrane reassured him, his voice a low murmur. They're my friends. They're here to help us keep you safe. They're sentinels. Just then, a commotion came from the minivan. A car door slammed open, and a woman stumbled out. She was thin, her hair a mess, her clothes disheveled. Her eyes were wild and unfocused. Leo, she shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. Leo, where are you? Get back in the car. She saw her son sitting next to a giant biker, surrounded by 4 more. Her panic instantly morphed into rage. What are you doing? She screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Coltrane. Get away from my son. I'm calling the police. Coltrane didn't move a muscle. He remained seated on the curb, a calm anchor in the rising tide of chaos. Ma'am, the police are already on their way. So is an ambulance for you. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used when de-escalation was the mission. You're in our way, Bear, a man who looked like he could wrestle a grizzly, growled from his post. His arms were crossed over his massive chest. The woman staggered forward, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. He's my son. You can't keep him from me. She tried to push past Bear, a foolish and desperate move. Bear didn't even flinch. He simply stood there, an immovable object. She bounced off his solid frame and stumbled backward. Ma'am, I suggest you stay right there until the authorities arrive, Preacher said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. Leo had buried his face in his backpack, his small body trembling violently. Coltrane put a hand on his back, a firm, reassuring pressure. I've got you, Leo. You're safe. Just listen to my voice." The distant wail of sirens grew closer. Red and blue lights flashed against the windows of the grocery store. 2 police cruisers and an ambulance swerved into the parking lot, pulling up behind the wall of motorcycles. Officers emerged, their hands on their holstered weapons, taking in the strange, intense scene. A frantic woman, a terrified child, and 5 formidable-looking bikers forming a protective cordon. One of the officers, a sergeant with graying hair and tired eyes, approached Preacher. "What's going on here?" "Your man over there can explain," Preacher said, nodding toward Coltrane. "He made the call. We're just here for support." The sergeant walked over to Coltrane, his expression cautious. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Miller. Can you tell me what happened?" Coltrane stood up slowly. He looked the officer in the eye. "The boy's name is Leo. I found him sleeping on the curb. He has a message written on the back of his shirt." He gently turned Leo around, who was still hiding his face. The officer leaned in and read the shaky black letters. "Help me. Can't wake Mom." Sergeant Miller's entire demeanor changed. The caution in his eyes was replaced by a grim understanding. He looked from the shirt to the disoriented woman, who was now weeping hysterically, and then back to Coltrane. "Thank you," the officer said, his voice filled with a sudden profound sincerity. "Thank you for stopping." The climax had passed. The rescue was in motion. Paramedics moved in, their focus immediately on Leo. A kind-faced woman knelt in front of him, speaking in a soft, soothing voice. She checked his vital signs, asking him if he was hurt. Leo just shook his head, still clutching his backpack. Other officers were dealing with his mother. They spoke to her calmly, trying to assess her condition. It was clear she was heavily under the influence of something, and she was quickly guided toward the ambulance for evaluation. The immediate danger was over. The threat was neutralized. Leo was safe. Coltrane stepped back, giving the first responders space to work. He watched as the paramedic wrapped a light blanket around Leo's shoulders, despite the heat. It was for comfort, not for warmth. She offered him a bottle of water, and he took it, sipping from it with trembling hands. His brothers from the club remained where they were, a silent honor guard, ensuring no one got too close, that the scene remained secure until everything was settled. They understood their role. They were the wall. After a few minutes, a social worker arrived, a woman with a calm face and gentle eyes. She spoke with Sergeant Miller, then knelt down to talk to Leo. As the professionals took over, Coltrane felt a strange sense of detachment. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind a deep, hollow ache. He had done his part. Now the system would take over. He turned to walk back to his bike, feeling like his job was done. "Wait." The voice was small, barely a whisper. He turned back. Leo was looking at him, the blanket pooled around his small frame. The paramedic and the social worker had given them a moment of space. Leo took a hesitant step forward, then another. He walked right up to Coltrane and, without a word, wrapped his thin arms around the biker's leg, burying his face in the worn denim of his jeans. Coltrane froze. Every bit of his tough, hardened exterior seemed to melt away in that single small gesture. He looked down at the top of the boy's head, at the dirty, sweaty hair, and felt a powerful wave of emotion crash over him. He slowly, carefully, rested his large, calloused hand on the boy's back. "Thank you," Leo mumbled into his jeans. "Thank you for seeing me. For seeing me." Those 3 words hit Coltrane harder than any punch he had ever taken. It wasn't just about seeing the shirt. It was about seeing him, seeing a small boy who had been rendered invisible by the world's indifference. "You're welcome, Leo," Coltrane whispered, his voice thick. "Any time." Sergeant Miller walked over, his face etched with gratitude. "Your instincts were spot on," he said, extending a hand. Coltrane shook it. She'd overdosed on opioids in the car. Leo said he'd been trying to wake her for hours. He finally got scared, wrote that note on his shirt with a marker he found on the floor, and got out. He was trying to find someone, anyone, to help. The officer shook his head, a look of weary disgust on his face. "You saved his life today. Probably hers, too. We can't thank you enough." "Just doing what's right," Coltrane said, his voice still rough. He watched as the social worker gently led Leo toward her car. Before he got in, Leo turned and looked back at Coltrane one last time. He gave a small, hesitant wave. Coltrane raised his hand and waved back. As the car pulled away, taking Leo toward a future that was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, safe, Coltrane finally allowed himself to breathe. His brothers gathered around him, clapping him on the back, their silent support now turning to gruff, quiet praise. The story could have ended there, a brief, heroic intervention. A life saved. A biker who went back to his life, carrying the memory of a brave little boy. But it didn't. Months turned into a year. Leo had been placed in the foster care system. His mother, facing criminal charges and a long battle with addiction, had relinquished her parental rights. It was a tragic, messy end to one chapter and a frighteningly uncertain beginning to another. Coltrane couldn't get the boy out of his head. He had given his contact information to Sergeant Miller, who had passed it along to Child Protective Services. He wasn't family, he wasn't a foster parent, but he had made a request. Just let me know he's okay. On the 1-year anniversary of that day in the parking lot, he received a letter. It was from Leo's new foster parents. They told him that Leo was healing. He was in therapy. He was slowly learning to trust again. They said he talked about the giant with the loud motorcycle who had been his guardian angel. Enclosed was a drawing, done in crayon. It depicted a huge, smiling man with a beard, standing next to a motorcycle. Next to him was a small boy. Above them, the sun was shining. Coltrane pinned that drawing to the corkboard in the Iron Sentinels clubhouse, right in the center. The incident had changed him. It had changed the entire club. They had always been a tight-knit group, a brotherhood. But Leo's rescue had awakened something else in them, a renewed sense of purpose beyond their own community. It was Preacher's idea. He called a meeting, what they called church, and stood before the members. He pointed to Leo's drawing. "We call ourselves Sentinels," he said, his voice resonating through the quiet room. "A sentinel is a soldier, a guard whose job is to stand and keep watch. We did that for Leo. But there are other Leos out there, children who are invisible, children who are whispering for help." That day, they made a decision. They started a foundation. They called it Leo's Watch. Their mission was simple: to partner with local schools, shelters, and law enforcement to identify and support at-risk children. They weren't counselors or social workers. They were guardians. They provided resources, raised money for school supplies and winter coats, and organized motorcycle mentorship days. They used their intimidating presence for good, showing up to support kids at sporting events or school functions, a silent promise that someone was watching over them. Years passed. Leo's Watch grew, becoming a well-respected local charity. The image of the Iron Sentinels in their community shifted from one of fear or suspicion to one of respect and gratitude. They were the unlikely guardians, the leather-clad angels of the forgotten. Coltrane kept in touch with Leo through his new family, who officially adopted him 2 years after the rescue. They sent Christmas cards every year. The first one had a photo of Leo, smiling a real, genuine smile, standing between his new mom and dad. Every year, the boy in the photo grew taller, more confident. The phone calls started when Leo was a teenager. They were awkward at first, a boy trying to find words to thank the man who had fundamentally altered the course of his life. Coltrane just listened, his voice a low, steady rumble, telling Leo how proud he was of him. 10 years after that fateful day in the food giant parking lot, a young man walked into the Iron Sentinels clubhouse. He was 18 years old, tall and lean, with the same kind brown eyes Coltrane remembered. He was holding an envelope. The clubhouse went quiet. The bikers, older now, with more gray in their beards, all turned to look. Coltrane was sitting at his usual table, cleaning a piece of his bike. He looked up, and his heart skipped a beat. He knew instantly who it was. "Leo?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. The young man smiled. "Hi, Jack." He walked over, and this time, there was no hesitation. He pulled Coltrane into a firm, strong hug. It wasn't the desperate cling of a frightened child, but the grateful embrace of a young man. "I wanted to show you this in person," Leo said, pulling away and handing him the envelope. Coltrane opened it. It was an acceptance letter, a full scholarship to a state university, where Leo planned to study social work. "I want to help kids," Leo said, his voice clear and steady. "Kids like I was. Kids who feel invisible. because you taught me that all it takes is one person to see you. Just one person to stop and look closer. Coltrane stared at the letter, a blur of pride and emotion welling up in his eyes. He looked at the confident, hopeful young man standing before him, a world away from the terrified child sleeping on a concrete curb. He saw the ripple effect of a single choice, the decision to stop, to look, to act. He saw life not just saved, but transformed. He saw a cycle of despair broken and replaced with a cycle of hope. Around the room, the other sentinels watched, their weathered faces soft with emotion. They saw the living embodiment of their new mission. They saw the legacy of Leo's watch. Coltrane finally found his voice. "You did this, Leo," he said, clapping a heavy hand on the young man's shoulder. "You were the brave one. You wrote the note." Leo shook his head. "I wrote the note, but you read it." That evening, the Iron Sentinels threw a party, not with the wild energy of their younger days, but with the deep, resonant joy of a family celebrating a milestone. Leo was the guest of honor, a symbol of why they rode, of what it meant to be a true sentinel. The story of that day became a lesson, a piece of club lore passed down to new members. It was a reminder that true strength wasn't in the roar of an engine or the toughness of a leather vest. It was in the willingness to be quiet, to be watchful, and to stop for the one who has been left behind. It was about having the courage to see what others do not, and the heart to do something about it.